I'm Val Freiberg. I'm Ashby Village's Executive Director. And it's truly an honor to co-host with Epworth Church this relevant talk by author Sandra Butler on her latest book, Leaving Home at 83. She'll be sharing with us life lessons after making courageous personal choices, which are all the more complex given the divisive world we are living in. For those of you who don't know us, Ashby Village is a vibrant community of older adults and volunteers from all backgrounds who are transforming how we age. We make it possible for older adults to age at home with dignity, community, purpose, and self-determination. If you aren't already, come join us as a volunteer, a member, or both. Like today's arts and culture presentation, we offer our programs and services like these free of charge. If you're able to donate, please do so. There are envelopes in the back, the entrance, and online. There will be an email, a follow-up email with the donation link. Okay, before I turn it over to Irene Marcos, who's a volunteer leader of our Arts and Culture series, an Ashby Village member, and a retired corporate executive, I want to thank you, Irene, for putting this event together and your awesome team. We couldn't do it without you. All right, Irene.
Well, hello and welcome. We've been looking forward to this presentation, and here we are. So thank you, Bev. Thank you for that lovely introduction. And first off, I want to give a big thank you to Epworth Church. They have been a wonderful partner for us. Pastor Witherspoon, Susan Jardine, Paul Nate Nosman, and Epworth Church have been partnering with our Arts and Culture group, and we so appreciate them. And thank you to our group members, the Arts and Culture group members, Sigrid Duesberg and Rondi Saslow, AV staff, Jessica Sterling and Cherise Hanshaw, and thanks to our volunteers today that signed you all in, Veronica Buxen and Elizabeth Hutchins, and Howard Kirsch. So welcome Sandra Butler, the author of 9 books.
5. 5.
Not according to your publicity, at any rate. By the way, there will be books of Sandy's available for purchase, and she'll be signing books. So we welcome Sandy. Her dear friend, she's going to be in conversation with her dear friend Nan Gefen. Nan is also an author. They co-authored a book called titled Mothering, It Never Ends, Mothering Middle-Aged Daughters. Nan is also the founding publisher of Tikkun magazine and the founder of Persimmon, Persimmon Tree, an online magazine of the arts for women over 60. Welcome, Nan.
Thank you.
Sandy's book, Leaving Home at 83, tells the story of a very strong woman and the choices she made after leaving her beloved Bay Area, our beloved Bay Area, and moving 50 years. She's living here for 50 years. Sandy left in order to live in a facility for elders in Phoenix called Desert Manor. Desert Manor was chosen because it was close to where her daughters live. This book is a great reminder for all of us at any age that we can choose to make the changes in our lives that may create more happiness. Big change, especially those late in life, can take a lot of courage, and Sandy has that level of courage. What does her new life in Arizona look like these days? I'm looking forward to hearing more about Sandy's experiences, her perspectives, and brave choices. So we'll just end by saying thank you, Sandy and Nan, for spending the afternoon with us. Welcome, welcome, and welcome to you all, and welcome to everybody that's on Zoom.
Thank you so much, Irene. And thank you, all of you who have come. So many familiar faces. It's a great pleasure to be here. I also want to say welcome to all the Zoom people. Apparently, there's some numbers of hundreds that are people who were right, Zoom people. And then this is being recorded, and who knows who else is going to see it. So, you know, thank you all for taking the time to really think about this and to listen to what Sandy has to say. And so that's all to the good. We have the front door closed. That's great. It's not going to be too cold in here. So we're set. I have known Sandy. We have been very close for almost 40 years. And we, together with Jane Ariel, who is there, have been in a women's group that's almost as old as that. It is as old as
Yeah,
that.
almost as old.
Yeah. And we have done various kind of political work, Women in Black, and various things together through the years. So many projects, and we've never gotten very far apart from each other. Okay. Okay. Anybody else having trouble hearing me? Oh, dear. Okay, maybe somebody could up it up. I'm number 4. Okay, I'll just speak as loud as I can then. Okay. So, you know how it is, you have somebody you've known for a bunch of years, decades, and then all of a sudden something new appears. You know how that is. And so I had that experience with Sandy, and I want to tell you about this because it's really, I don't know, I love this story. That's why I want to tell you about it. So what it was is that we started Persimmon Tree. It's a magazine of the arts for women over 60, or by women over 60. And you can look it up online. So we started it here. And Sandy was on the editorial board. And we had this idea that what we wanted to do was to have a series of pieces written by women who were just becoming 60 and women who were just becoming 70 and 80 and 90, and their thoughts and feelings about the whole experience of aging. And so Sandy was there, you know, said, like, Sandy, why don't you do the piece on becoming 70? Because she had just become 70 at that time. She said, okay. She wrote a piece. Now, the given is that I have read Sandy's writing through all the years, and Sandy has been a wonderful writer about situations that she describes, and she describes what goes on with them. But it's more, her writing in the past has been more from an observational point of view. Well, she wrote this piece, it was called Tiptoeing Towards 70, and she was writing about trying dating. And it was so funny. It was just a scream. And it was like this woman, all of a sudden, a new voice came from her. And it was very exciting. Again, as I said, I've read so much of her work through the years because that's how it's been. And here was this Sandy, the voice, a whole other voice. And so I learned about that, and I saw that, and what a pleasure, what a pleasure. And so the 2 books that you're going to be hearing about today, the first one is The Kitchen is Closed, which Sandy wrote in 2002. No,
2022.
2022. And then the one that has just recently been published, Leaving Home at 83, are from that voice that she has developed. That's a different new voice. So I just wanted you to have that piece of background on Sandy. So Sandy, your turn, you get to
Okay.
begin.
My turn. So I think the way I would say what Nan said is like this. I came out of second wave feminism passionate and very, very earnest. And the first 3 books, third one being with Nan, were books that I think back now on as being written in a very earnest, passionate, political voice. There's a lot of musts and shoulds in all of the books. And it felt to me that my work as a writer was to find the subject matter in women's lives that were in the shadows, that hadn't been spoken aloud, that needed to be brought forward into public discourse. And that was my job, to find a way to do that. So the first book was about the politics of incest in 1978. The second one was about what it was to be in a lesbian couple while my partner was dying, and what it meant to accompany a beloved and what it meant for the beloved to be facing her own death. We alternated the chapters. So it was personal, but it was for a larger good. And Nan and I also, when we wrote Mothering Middle-Aged Daughters, was another, we felt, subject matter that had not been talked about, because we're still mothering, even when they're 50 and 60, but the mothering looks and feels so different. And the dynamics of power and vulnerability and need changes so much, and it wasn't said, so we said it. When Nan asked me to write this piece about dating, it was really the first time that I used my language to talk about my own personal life, that I gave myself permission after a lifetime of inviting the stories of women and trying to move those stories out into the world, to tell my stories. It took that long. And I am having such a good time telling my stories. And there was one little mistake Nan made. There's 3 books. This is going to be 3 books. I'm going to read a little from each of them. The book I'm working on now is called Now What? Notes from the Front Lines of Old Age. So it's The Kitchen is Closed, Leaving Home, and Now What is kind of how I'm thinking about how I want to write about what it is for me to be an old woman, in the hopes that each of you can find your translations, your stories from mine. And Tiptoeing Towards 70 makes me laugh. It's 17 years ago. I can't even believe the things I was thinking 17 years ago, but there it is.
So now we're going to talk about the book that has just come forward, Leaving Home at 83. And I mean, the question the title asks is why? Why did you leave home? I think many of us, it's not so simple about where we're going to live and what is home when we get to be at this point in life. And there's alternatives that we talk about and think about. But here you left home at 83. So why? What happened?
Okay. It felt kind of like an unexpected cascade of things that happened. First, one of my closest friends left town to move to be near her children. Then another of my closest friends died. Then I got diagnosed with lung cancer. And so it was kind of a beginning of the sense of stability of my life was shifting, and I wasn't able to count on the things that I had counted on, the cast of characters, the body, it was all different. I had the surgery, and my younger daughter came, took care for me. It was lung surgery, so that I was left not knowing what okay breathlessness was, what dangerous breathlessness was. How many times can you check your Apple Watch to see what the numbers are? I mean, it was that kind of urgent, anxious, unstable. And my daughter took wonderful care of me. The 4 weeks, I guess she was there after the surgery. And the moment the door closed behind her when she went to return home, I was overwhelmed with how scared I was. Just overwhelmed with it, because I have never experienced myself as a woman who's scared. I'm a woman who figures out what needs to be done, and I do it. I don't stop for the scared part. I just figure out the next steps and I take them. So this was for me a very new experience and a very new way of knowing myself. And I guess the word that comes to my mind right this minute is it felt very babyish. I think that was kind of what it felt. I just was not feeling like a grown-up. I wanted to be near my kids. Did I think through what that meant? Did I think through how they would feel? Not even for a second. Luckily, they're very patient with me, but in that moment, it was, I need to be with my kids. Now, it was not that, as Nan said, I have not developed and maintained a very rich and beautiful community of women in the Bay Area. The flaw in it is that we're all the same age. So they could bring me a casserole or drive me to a doctor's office, but they couldn't, if I fell down, they couldn't get me off the floor. They can't even get themselves off the floor without getting on their hands and knees. So it was not going to be an option going forward. There was going to be a lot of love and a lot of support, but not actually what I was scared about. So I decided that I needed to be near my kids. And the story I told myself was a completely made-up story, but it's a story that is in the department that so many of us think about, which is we don't want to be a burden to those who love us. So the story that I told myself was, I know if I move to Phoenix, which is not a suitable city for me, I can just say that now. If I move to Phoenix, I'll be near my daughters, and if I need help, I'll be there. They won't have to fly across the country the way I did with my mother, who in her efforts not to be a burden, dug her paper-thin heels in and stayed in her home. And every time she needed help, I had to go across the country. I wasn't going to do that. I was going to be a really good mom and be right nearby so I wouldn't be a burden. Well, there were many flies in that ointment, one of which was both of my girls had brought their father to Phoenix. He was at that point 94 and 95, and they were caring for him in a different residential facility. He needed a lot of help, almost full time. Both of them were taking care of him. They both had busy lives. Here comes mom, plopped right into the middle of the whole thing, telling herself she's not going to be a burden. I think probably that's the fullest answer to the why, and I'll hold off some of the other things for your other questions. But that's the why. I turned into a big, tall, old, scared baby. That's the why.
So we're all listening to your story really carefully. So are you saying that you made the decision rather impulsively, or that you decided that you were going to leave the Bay and
Mhm.
move to Phoenix?
So Nan is nothing if not kind. For those of you who know Nan, know this. Impulsive is the most benign word you could use for what I did. And just to fill in that piece of it a little bit, I am certain that my beloveds in the Bay Area spent a good deal of time together saying, what? She's doing what?
Right.
But nobody said anything beyond a very mild, are you sure? Which was what I needed. Any more disruption at that time in my life would have just been more than I could have navigated. And all of the women in my life saw me off with, bewildered, loving embraces. So yes, it was impulsive. It was, I was just too scared to hold still. That's the truth of it.
So you moved yourself to Phoenix,
Mhm.
and you immediately then made the decision to enter Desert Manor. And we need to say here that that's not the name of the facility, that's the book name of the facility. And so you made that decision. And so talk to us about that whole piece, what it was like,
Right.
what you did, so
Well,
forth and so on.
the thing, because I know a lot of people this is something that we think about. How long will we stay in our own homes? What are the pros and cons of moving into a residential facility? And ideally, if nothing else, after I finish talking, it will be clear to everyone here, if it's not already, you have to be measured and thoughtful about this decision, which I was not. So what propelled me into Desert Manor was that it was literally 10 minutes from each of my daughters in a different direction. And I had this very lifelong hunger to be taken care of. And that was another part of this time in my life, that something that had been not so much denied in who I was, but banked to be taken care of. And I was going to go and be fed, which was a very big thing because cooking and domestic arts have never been my strength or interest. I was going to be fed, there were going to be activities, there were going to be interesting people. It was perfect. I could just stop all of the exhausting, terrifying parts of being an adult, and I was going to go and be cared for. Well, nobody makes a decision like that when you're an adult, but I did. And so everything that could possibly go wrong went wrong because I wasn't starting in a measured, careful place. I'm going to read you two brief sections to give you a little sense of Desert Manor. The first thing that happened was the very first night that I was there, I went, after the kids left, I went down to dinner, and this was going to be the high point. This was going to be the beginning of my being fed. I had watched all the videos of the rolling green grass outside of the dining room and smiling servers bringing me all my choices, and I was ready for that. Okay. Having eaten an egg salad sandwich and several apples throughout the day, at 6 o'clock, a reasonable hour, I thought, for a meal, I took off my unpacking shirt, which was not to be worn anywhere in the vicinity of public space, substituted a more attractive one, and went downstairs for my first opportunity to be served dinner.
A little
A
slow.
little slower. As I approached the entry to the large, crowded dining room, the woman who was there, I assumed, to seat residents, looked startled and excused herself and walked hastily toward the swinging doors to the kitchen. How lovely, I thought. They probably have something special for the inaugural meal of new residents. Maybe there'll be a cupcake or something festive. She returned, possibly crestfallen, although I couldn't be sure because her mask precluded interpretation, to tell me that the kitchen was closing. I could no longer be served, but she'd be happy to prepare a plate for me to take back to my apartment. The guide to everything you want to know that had been warmly pressed into my hand at the front desk stated clearly that dinner was served from 4:30 to 6:30. What it meant was that diners could extend their eating till 6:30. Serving itself ended at 6. At that moment, a book I had written during the pandemic, The Kitchen is Closed and Other Benefits of Being Old, was being prepared for publication. I had closed my kitchen in Emeryville to arrive at one that was closed to me. The task, I firmly told my sinking self, was not to take this as any kind of an omen, merely a disheartening coincidence. Day 2. After another day of unpacking and creating a sense of order, I went down to dinner precisely at 5:45. Approaching a table where Malka, a woman with whom I had earlier exchanged a smile and a hello, was holding forth, I quickly learned my second important lesson. Residents dine on time and choose the people they eat with. She looked alarmed to see me settling myself on the chair beside her and turned confusedly toward her husband, who squared his spindly shoulders and said, "I have bad news for you." Has someone died, I thought? I don't know anybody here to feel bad about that. And that's almost always what bad news for old people means. His wife timidly entered the conversation. This is a set table for 6. The same people always eat together. It's set in stone, her husband added. But we don't always have 6, she added encouragingly, presumably letting me know that I could sit with them if a regular died, got sick, or had other plans. I see was the best I could manage as I rose from the table. The 14-year-old who had gone into the high school lunchroom at the start of the semester and unwittingly sat down at the table filled with what turned out to be the popular kids. Bobby Friedlander and Judy Hirschman looked at me and, unable to find words strong enough to communicate the egregiousness of my presence, simply stared until I got up to leave. Now, 70 years later, I left the dining room with the same mix of embarrassment, anger, and a strong desire to become invisible. So much for maturity. And another glimpse at the entertainment part of the programming in Desert Manor. What remained of individual autonomy and institutional life were decisions about what activities to attend. That's what was left of our independence. Many residents clung to it, determined to create an environment as close to the one they had left behind as possible. I wondered if any of them felt relief at having their days pre-planned. These were old people who had shaped their personal lives, their work lives, their parenting lives, their economic lives, and were probably tired of shaping and willing to be shaped, at least most of the time, as did I just a few months ago. Each morning, I reviewed the offerings on the elevator walls, although there was little that interested me. One exception was the entertainment, usually scheduled at 3 o'clock to account for, I suspected, both lunch and a nap. There were magicians, jugglers, groups of senior singers, baton twirlers, tap dancers, and piano players, both jazz, cabaret, and classical, all trained and very good. These local artists were happy to have a venue for their performances, and Desert Manor needed to entertain its residents. It was a perfect fit. The first time I joined the audience, I sat down beside a woman who was boisterously singing with the mostly out-of-tune crowd, while the mic was being passed around so everybody could have their opportunity for a solo. She accepted her moment in the spotlight with a shy pleasure, singing the words on the TV screen and joining Neil Diamond in Sweet Caroline. A woman sitting across from me in the shapeless circle wobbled to her feet, holding tightly to her walker as she moved her hips and bent her knees, her face embellished with a delighted smile. Let Me Call You Sweetheart was up next, and the mic was passed to a woman who remained seated on her scooter, belting out the lyrics, while a rangy woman beside her danced, punctuated by vivacious arm raises and an intermittent foot lift meant to suggest a kick. A small kick, but still. While I would have chosen more Aretha and less Barry Manilow, the pleasures of singing and adaptive dancing allowed everyone to find their way to their unique forms of rocking and rolling, even if the rock was more of a sway and the roll an imperceptible shift. But not all the residents moved slowly and deliberately. There are half a dozen scooter drivers whose speed evoked their younger days behind the wheel. While some skirted share legs and group of people with skillful economy, there were those who careened, driving with one hand on the wheel, calling out hellos as they whizzed past, not watching what passed here for the road. I imagine them in their Chevys, radio on, cigarette in the hand resting on the open window frame, singing along with the radio and hurrying to the next exhilarating moment of their still emerging lives. Now, they danced with their vehicles.
So the question is, you mentioned your daughters, and there you are at Desert Manor, and living in a place that has your own apartment. You were independent in that way. You ended up having meals. You met people.
Mm-hmm.
You made community in some way.
Mhm.
And but it was not working for you.
Right.
And so your daughters would come and visit you, and you'd be talking to your daughters about what was going on. And what can you say about that? Because certainly I know your daughters, and they're very invested in having mom be fine, okay, and like that. So talk about that.
Okay. So my daughters have been on to me for decades, even though I didn't think that was the case. I think what I want to do by way of answering this to give you a sense of what my relationship was like with my daughters during that time, and since, I would add, is a short excerpt from a piece that I wrote recently for the Huffington Post that is going to be in the next book, Now What? And it's called Confessions of a Lying Old Woman. Living alone when you're my age requires lying. There's no way around it. It isn't that I mean to lie. It's that I want to avoid the conversation that will immediately ensue if I don't. The people who monitor my life, as in my daughters, need to feel reassured that I'm eating healthily, exercising and sleeping enough, and being engaged. Engaging means different things to them than to my aging friends, but they are the ones to whom I must answer. Consequently, all of these expectations occasion more and more lying, my form of which is most often that of smiling in direction. I assure my daughters that I eat vast quantities of fruits, vegetables, salmon, and chicken. There is rarely any mention of my consumption of popcorn, rum raisin ice cream, or pistachio nuts. When we're having a meal together, I am careful to order a big slab of protein surrounded by leafy green leaves. I demur when offered crackers and cheese and murmur daintily with a downcast expression, dairy. Until they read this, I'll continue to feel confident I've gotten away with those lies. I lie not only by indirection, but also by omission about the frequency of my accidents. They include tripping over, stumbling into, brushing against, and worst of all, falling all the way down. I'm uncertain if not telling my children that I fell down constitutes withholding necessary information, yet another permutation of lying, but I suspect it does. Why is it anyone's business? They'll just worry and have advice, most of which are bromides I already know. Be careful. Only do one thing at a time. Move slowly. Use arnica. The only person who knows I fell is my Apple Watch, who dutifully flashed, "I see you fell. Do you need help? Should I call 911? I pressed back, "I'm fine," essentially lying in whatever language they have programmed for a response. I hobbled upstairs, put the freezer food in the freezer and the refrigerator food in the refrigerator, and then lay down and went to sleep. I've concluded that I'm handling the situation maturely. There are more things that I lie about. Well, not exactly lying, I just never mention them, like losing, followed by forgetting. I'm a very tidy woman. Everything in my home has a spot in which it resides, a clear and obvious one, so that it's easy to find when I need to retrieve it. Order comforts me. But even in my carefully put together home, I lose things. Eventually, they turn up in a pants pocket, lost at the bottom of my bag, or stuck between a pile of papers on my desk. But how that came to be their momentary resting place is never clear. Talking out loud is the newest development in my living alone. It feels comforting. It isn't that I want another person's voice in my apartment. I don't. I just want a voice, and mine does just fine. I think I'll watch Hacks, I say brightly. Then I get up from my desk, walk into the living room, and do just that. It's kind of like having non-demanding company. I enjoy talking to myself and continue to find myself sprightly. Although I'm careful to keep my observations to myself when my daughters are around, because their experience of their mother offering her newest thoughts in the empty air would alarm them. I lose words. Of course I do. I'm 86 years old. I even lose entire trains of thought. But I remember enough to keep myself interested and do my best to decide that whatever I forgot wasn't essential or that the thought would eventually return. But when it does, it's often in the middle of something else where it doesn't fit. And I don't understand why I'm remembering whatever it is. Behind my agreeable face is an old woman holding fiercely to her wavering autonomy. I wonder if the middle-aged children of aging parents yield to parental obfuscations and equivocations, the little lies we tell, because they may not really want to know about the forgetting, falling, creative eating, losing, bumping into sharp objects, and talking to themselves, realities that define their parents' lives. Would my daughters really want to know what goes on when they aren't around? The challenges I face every day and all that I go through to be able to live my life the way I want to live it? Do they and so many other children of aging parents worry that the more they know, the more they may have to step towards us and our increasingly precarious hold on independence and fold us into their lives? Because that's where all this is eventually going, isn't it? Our lying is buying us time, time that we want as our own. And I'll continue to lie as long as I can get away with it. Now, before this, thank you. I just want to add that before this was published, I showed it to my daughters. They looked at each other, they nodded at me, and they exchanged a glance that said without words, who did she think she was kidding? So when the girls came to visit me, the thing that I kept back probably the most was that rush of eagerness to see them, to be with them, to take a drive with them, to have a hunk of protein and green leaves in a restaurant with them. I was careful, I thought I was careful, of course I was wrong, to not let them know how when they were going to pick me up at 12:30, once it was 11 o'clock, I was already counting when I was going to get to see them. I didn't want that to show. I didn't want the nakedness of my need of them to show. I think I was fairly moderately-ish successful with that, but most of the rest, I wasn't successful at all, but those were my efforts at lying.
Oh, my. So there you were at Desert Manor. They would come and say, how you doing, Mom? And you would say, we can all say, okay.
Yeah,
Like that.
yeah.
And there you were.
I think it's another thing to say that feels important here. This isn't about my daughters in particular, but I think it's something that's fairly common. When I was in the middle of my life, in my 50s, my 60s, and completely besotted with my own life, I just found it so interesting what my life was. I was a very devoted and very responsible daughter, and I called my mother every Sunday morning without fail to find out how she was and how everything was. And there were certain questions that I would ask. Are you walking? And does Irma call? And, do you go to the meeting? And did you take this class? And whatever I say, all the things that, and of course, she probably was lying to me in the same way, but I went through my checklist of being a responsible daughter and asked her all the questions. She gave me the answers that I took as, okay, Mom's okay for this week. Mom is okay. It never occurred to me until I was old to wonder what it felt like for my mother when she hung up the phone in that moment with all those words unsaid and all those questions unasked. And as I say, that's not my exact experience with my kids, but I know from so many women I've talked to. And also I'm teaching now memoir writing classes in several residential facilities in Tucson, where I now live. And the way I begin my classes is by asking them, they're all old, to remember the questions that they didn't have enough sense to ask their parents or grandparents and didn't regret it until long after they were dead, and it was too late to ask the questions, and now they were never going to get those answers. And what would it be to write for your children and grandchildren the questions you wish they asked you? And then off they go, because there's so much to say. So that just feels like an important footnote to this part of the conversation that I wanted to add.
Yeah, good. So you left Desert Manor, and you want to say a few words about that? Why, start out about the kind of logistics and why
Yeah.
you made that decision, and then we'll talk more about the whole thing, about where you're living, where we're living, where our
Right.
feelings about the whole thing.
Right.
So go ahead.
So there were many women at Desert Haven who loved institutional life and could just give over to it. And there was one woman in particular who was unforgettable. She had purple hair, who would say gleefully to anybody who would ask her, "It's like being in camp all the time." I mean, it was the perfect fit for her. There were also women and men who had partners of decades and decades who needed physical support or help. And being at Desert Manor allowed them not to be a wife or a husband and a caretaker, but just a wife or a husband. And that was extremely freeing for a lot of the women and the men who were there. As I said, I came into Desert Manor with such unrealistic expectations, with such need, with such vulnerability, with such a lack of clarity about what would this kind of decision require of me. It was also this particular place, different than the places that I'm working now in Tucson. This particular place did not have either a good cultural or political fit for me. Coming from the Bay Area, the assumptions that I made, the shorthand that I speak, was not met with most of the residents who were there. So that part of it was what do I want to say? It wasn't that it was lonely. It was that I felt alien. I felt other. And living in the Bay Area, that's not I certainly felt other as a teenager, but living in the Bay Area for 50 years, that was a very unfamiliar experience and an unhappy experience for me. I did what I do to shape my days. I read and I wrote and I walked and I had whatever conversations I could have, and I went to the entertainment and I sang and I danced and I did all that. But when my younger daughter, who was just beginning a second career after her first one as an academic, and her transition and her 50th birthday, and decided she wanted to live and work less out of her mind and more out of here, which I secretly thought I could have told you that all those years ago, but I didn't say it. So she's become a death doula. And she's perfect. It's the perfect thing. It's what she should have all along. She'll see that now when she watches this Zoom, she'll know. So she said to me, I think Tucson, Mom, might be a better place for me to do the work that I want to do. There's a larger community. It's a blue city. Phoenix is sort of purplish red. And I think that I'll find community there. And maybe we should just take a drive and see what you think about Tucson. At which point I thought, I already know what I think about Tucson, let's go. But I didn't say that either. I said, that's a good idea, sweetheart. So we went down to Tucson, and Tucson is beautiful. It's culturally rich. It's politically interesting. It's like a small-ish Berkeley in many, many ways. It was just such a right fit for me. And so after 9 months at Desert Haven, my daughter and I moved, Desert Manor. I made up the name, so I can't always keep track. We moved to Tucson, where I've been living now for almost 3 years. Yeah.
Sandy, mostly you, have been going at this for an hour almost. And I know that there's going to be a question period after.
I want to read something from this first.
Okay. And I also understand that people are going to be writing down questions, right? Is that how it's done? Yeah. So when are you going to be gathering together the questions people are going to be? What's the procedure? I'm asking Irene here.
Signal from you, if you feel like, well, we've talked about all we plan to talk about, and we're ready to answer some questions, we're happy to do that. We don't have to go until 4 o'clock. So
Okay.
when you two give me the signal, then the questions will come up.
Okay.
Okay, oh, okay. And then they're gonna be written down, is that?
Yes, they're on index cards.
Oh, okay, so
And
you're all
You
writing,
will have a chance to look at the questions.
Okay.
And ask the questions.
Okay.
And Sandy can look at them and see, there might be questions she doesn't want to answer, that's fine.
okay.
That seems unlikely, but maybe.
Pardon? Where do the people get index cards?
Should have been offered an index card at the.
They have them already, honey. So I think there's really only one other piece of all of this that I want to say before the conversation starts, which is the best part of everything anyhow. And that's the idea of naming ourselves and honoring the language of being old. Being old is a life stage, like menopause was a life stage, like adolescence was a life stage. And to the degree we can, it's like, remember, for those of you who remember in the early consciousness raising days, the idea of thinking about what it means to be old, what the real freedoms are, what the real losses are, what the real questions are. So I just want to read a very little bit from The Kitchen is Closed, where I try to talk about this. I'm not a woman who is older or elderly or mature. Unlike Michelle Obama, I'm no longer becoming. I've become. My children are middle-aged and continuing to grow into their fullness. I, on the other hand, appear to have reached what is the maximum level of my maturity. And while I'm more adult in public than I am in private, that has always been the case. I'm not nearly as kind as I had intended to become, but at least greatly improved from the earnest young woman who valued certainty over ambiguity. I'm less evaluative about how and why people behave as they do, because I've learned over and over again how tremendously complicated it is to be a human being. I delight in the freedom that oldness confers, at least the freedom not to care about so many of the things that once seemed so important. You could call me set in my ways, and I'm very fond of my ways since it took so many decades to figure out what they were. They're what remain after years of painful, grudging, and fearful release of self-protective behaviors and choices, all of which involved psychotherapy, foolish relationships, and way too many gin and tonics. My ways make sense to me. And perhaps if Frank Sinatra hadn't gotten there first, I might have titled this book, My Ways. The life I thought I was preparing for never arrived. Instead, another unfolded with unexpected openings, gifts, and catastrophes. Nothing I anticipated came to pass, but so much else did. So much I could never have imagined. Rich, startling, melancholy, and triumphant.
I think that's a really good place to end this conversation for now. There's all kinds of things that didn't get said, but we only have a limited period of time. And I'm looking forward to the questions that are going to appear.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so the first one is, what kind of a place did you live in? Oh, okay. What kind of a place did you live in Tucson is the question.
Now,
Maybe just describe both places.
both places.
Okay.
Okay. My apartment in Desert Manor was a big, spacious, light-filled apartment in a working-class residential facility. Overworked, underpaid staff, kind, overworked and underpaid. Most of the residents were people who had worked really hard all their lives, physical labor to a great extent, and were very grateful to have saved enough and have arrived at the time in their lives where they could come to rest. Where I am now in Tucson is in another two-bedroom, light-filled, really light-filled. The mountains right outside my windows are just glorious. I live by myself in an apartment house that was created out of a Benedictine monastery, where all of the sisters, I think is the right word, had died. And or gone back to the mother house, and they turned this glorious monastery and added on wings and made it an apartment complex right in the middle of Tucson. It's just beautiful, as is my apartment. I think the thing to say about where I live now, I'm finding my way into a life that has in many ways echoes of my life in the Bay Area. But for the first year or year and a half, I came to rest in an organization called Senior Pride. And it is not unlike the Village, but it is focused on LGBT seniors. And it was welcoming, it was variegated. There were all kinds of interesting people with whom I spoke a particular shorthand, one of the many shorthands we all speak. There were no lesbians, by the way, at Desert Manor. And when I came out to one woman who lived down the hall, who was considered the artist in the community, and therefore the most kind of avant-garde and sophisticated person around. And I came out to her and there was a very long pause, after which she said, "That's nice, dear." So coming to Tucson and finding a very wide range of lesbians and gay men and some transgender people, it was a kind of exhalation that I could make, that I was going to find my people. I was going to be able to make my way in the LGBT community. And then I had to find my way in other communities, in the Jewish community, in the political community. And I'm still in the process of doing that. But Senior Pride gave me almost an immediate cushion upon which I could come to rest when I made that second move. Yeah. Let's go with these questions.
Okay. Jane, you were waving your hand, but.
Yeah, can I say something before you go?
Sure, go ahead.
As somebody who knows Sandy for over 20 years, I just want to thank you, Sandy, for bringing yourself so forward, so honest, and saying things that you could hear the silence in the audience that means so much to people who are struggling with the issue. So
Thank you.
Thank you, Janie. Thank you, sweetie. Thank you.
So there are, I think, 3 questions that have to do with fear. And this is going back to the beginning of the story, when Sandy had her lung cancer and she was really just in a state of great panic, I think. And the questions have to do, okay, here's one. You originally moved because you were motivated by fear. So how would you counsel people who are fearful so that their decision is more thoughtful? And that's a part of it. And then and other questions are like, well, how can you deal with fear? How can you know, what do you do when you're really scared like that? So do you have any?
Well, I'll just take a pass at it.
Take a pass. Go for it.
I think that what happened to me is that fear overcame everything else. I think to be old and to be aging and to have our bodies or our minds start to go askew in one way or another, there isn't any way not to be scared. You're not paying attention if you're not a little bit scared. But fear, ideally, is one of the many feelings that we might have. Our body is alerting us to some decisions may need to be made, or some conversations may need to be had with our family, or some financial decisions might have to be changed. Fear can be the portal to thinking more fully and, unlike me, more calmly about. It's telling you next steps are coming closer. Think carefully about what they are and what the next steps are that work best for you, and consult as you need to consult. I was just swimming in only one dimension of what needed to happen. I guess that's what I would say. Don't do what I did.
Okay. So also going back to what you were talking about with your daughters, there's a question. To what extent have your daughters maintained their independent lives? Is balance possible for them, is the question.
Vis-a-vis me.
Yeah, you.
So here's what my daughters do. They watch me. 2 weeks ago, my daughter came down from Phoenix to visit me. And we went out for a bite to eat. I saw how she was watching to see, after I turned the car on, how long it took me to put the seatbelt on. I saw she was watching. When we pulled back into the parking lot at the end, she said very carefully, do you think your driving is a little zippy? I know one is on the East Coast now, but she's not in Tucson anymore, but I know they talk about how's mom doing. I know they are. And I know that I'm under their scrutiny, and I'm so careful to try not to forget a word in front of them or to lose my train of thought in front of them. And sometimes it happens and I can finesse it, but mostly you can't. You know what happens when you go blank. You just blank. You can smile vacantly, but it's not successful, really. So I think that my daughters, because they had the experience with their dad, understand that there is going to be a time they're going to have to fold me in and care for me the way they cared for their dad. And they know their dad, by the way, was very happy to be taken care of. He loved being taken care of. He was a sweetheart all the way through. He was appreciative and loved every bit of everything they did, whatever it was. That's not me. That's really not me. And I could just tell you one story about this. During the aftermath of my surgery, it wasn't so much that I was in pain, it was more discomfort. It was that I didn't have my whole lung, and I couldn't get the breathing thing and the breathlessness thing. I didn't know what was a good day and what was not a good day. And I felt so impotent and I felt so powerless. And I hollered at my daughter because she gave me the tuna fish and water instead of the tuna fish and oil. It was the only control I could have, was to hold on to that, which embarrassed me the minute it came out of my mouth, and I knew why it had happened, so did she. But they know that I'm a tough old broad. They know that I don't give over easily. They know that as much as I want to be taken care of, it's really hard for me to be taken care of. They know all that about me, and they will, I trust, find their way to make whatever that last bit is going to be as respectful as they can make it, depending on what the nature of the askewness is at the end of my life. Yeah.
You spoke some about, now here you are in Tucson, and how you're moving forward in Tucson. And here's a question. In the Bay Area, you had a rich and satisfying community. And did you try to find or build such a community in Arizona, is the question, and how? So tell us about life after Desert Manor. And also, you know what? I think this is a good time for you to talk about, maybe just underscore some of the things you learned about yourself, and you learned about what about services for people who, as we grow older, what's available, and just speak a bit about that. What you got from Desert Manor, not only what didn't work, but
So there's two parts here. So the first part that I'll say is that I will never again have what I had in the Bay Area. It's just not real. As Jane was saying, it takes decades to have the kind of rich, deep intimacies that we create in our lives. The women in the Bay Area, those who are still alive in the Bay Area, who are my intimate people, I can say my brother's name or my mother's name, and they know everything that goes along with that from top to bottom. That's all I need to say is that one word. That will never happen again. What I have now in Tucson are comrades who are good company, with whom I go to the movies, with whom I have dinner, with whom going forward I will be doing political work. We tell each other our stories. But the being known, the deeply being known resides here. So that's the first part, I think, of the answer. The second thing that you asked me, Nan, was about what did I learn? What was the question? What did I?
Yeah. What did you learn from the experience? Because the experience of Desert Manor really makes up most of the book.
Right.
And so what was it you got from this,
Okay.
as well as you've talked already about why it didn't work,
Mhm.
and I think you've been really clear about that, but also, so when you think about it now.
Okay. I think I could answer it psychologically, and I could answer it structurally. Psychologically, it was a profound learning experience for me, just profound. I was in a world of others. The people were unfamiliar to me. And when I go back, and Nan was part of this, and Francis Reed is here, there you are, read my early drafts, and with great kindness said, no. It's too distant, it's too snarky, it's too evaluative. It was like I couldn't find my way to who they were because they were so other for me. And as the months went by, and as I learned just the surface part of their stories and why they were there and some of their history, it became clear to me that they were doing what everybody does, which is to create what was familiar. That's what we do. When we're stuck in a new environment, we create what is familiar. And that was what they were doing. And what they created was what was familiar. And when I began to see the ways that they were less other than how I move into a new place, like how I moved to Tucson and created what is familiar, it began to feel more tender. My relationships had a quality of a tenderness and an openness and a less what quality than they did in the early days. And in the book, there are many stories about the people who were there, and some of them were very, very moving, and some of the experiences I had were very moving. And I'm grateful that I had that experience because it softened me. It opened me in places that I was not yet softened and opened. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. One of the cards refers to the people who appear in the
Yeah.
book.
Yeah.
And as I know enough about you to know that these aren't portraits of actual
Mhm.
people, but they represent different things that
Mhm.
you experienced.
Mhm.
And so it wasn't like you picked somebody and drew a description of that, and then that person would read it and feel like, oh, yes, that's
Oh,
me.
no. Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause there was some concern about that in one
Yeah.
of these
Yeah.
cards.
Hence the name change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you were really rigorous about.
Yeah.
About.
Well,
making it-
been being respectful
Yeah,
of these old people who are making the lives that they can make at this stage of their lives.
yeah, including you.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Oh, there
So,
was one more thing.
okay,
So, you know, I don't know if it's still the way the ad goes, but there's a middle-aged blonde woman with her hair is like a helmet and a lot of teeth and a very big smile. And she's telling you about how you need to find a place for mom. You know that woman? And there's all this information about a place for mom. There's the ARP supplements and all of the things that mom needs. Who asks mom? That's what needs to happen. That's what needs to happen. What is it we need? What is it we want? What is it that would give dignity and possibility and richness to our oldness? And I know there's a lot of really excellent, and I don't mean to be dismissive, I know there's a lot of excellent gerontologists, graduate people in their 40s and 50s. I'm here to tell you that when I was 65, I had absolutely no idea what it was going to be like to be 75. And at 75, I had absolutely no idea of what it was going to be like to be me now. So as well-meaning as it all is, they need to ask mom. They need to ask dad what the structures, what the resources need to be as we move into a time in our lives where we can't stay in our own homes and we need some alternative that supports and respects this time in our lives. Yeah.
we certainly haven't said it all, but we've said a lot.
I have.
Is there anybody who, out of all of you, who would like to make either a statement or a question? Anything you want to add to this conversation? Yes, please.
I'm one of those that was a gerontologist in my younger years, and now I'm retired, but in a way, I'm still a gerontologist. But I related so much to everything that you said. One question is, you said so many things when you were not reading from the book. And so I'm wondering if some of these topics that you talked about, family relationships and so forth,
Oh, that's good.
are.
Please stand.
Okay. So some of these things that you said, I don't know if I hear, I don't, but I can yell. Yeah. So many of the things that you said, I wasn't clear if they're in your book. I'm planning to buy your book and probably buy a few of them. But I wasn't exactly sure. You made so many wise comments, and from someone who has been in the field for years and years, I really appreciated your perspective, everything you said, especially as someone coming from the Bay Area, from Berkeley. But I wondered if the things that you said, are they in your book? That was one question. The other one is a different question, which is about Tucson. My son actually went to college in Tucson, and I was thinking of that these are going to be my retirement years with him. Didn't turn out to be. He came back and has his family here now, so I'm lucky in that I don't need to move to Arizona at all or worry about the politics. But I'm wondering, where are in Tucson? You haven't said yet. You said you alluded to an apartment, but are you in senior independent living,
Oh.
assisted living?
No.
Any of those things? And you mentioned about how you didn't like the meals, but what do you do about meals now?
A lot of takeout. I'm living independently. The kitchen is grudgingly reopened. Yes. Yeah. And I'm going to be sitting out there in the cold. Probably wear a coat. And the books are going to be out there. And yes, I mean, I'm not 100% sure. I think that everything that I said is somewhere in here. There may be new thoughts that I said today that are not in here, but basically everything that I've said to you today is in the two books.
Yeah, I think there is a slight difference though, because the book has much more of your experience. It
This
doesn't.
more
Much,
storytelling.
much more.
Yeah.
And your thoughts and feelings about it. And you don't have long treatises about what you, well,
No, there aren't so
little-
many wise remarks maybe in the books. More stories, less wisdom.
yeah, there we
Yeah.
go. There's another question right here.
For a long time, I imagine, like many of us, we had a lot of stuff. And I just wondered, since you made the decision quickly out of fear, how did you deal with stuff?
Mhm. Yeah,
That's a great
you
question.
know, it's a wonderful question, and I'm going to start Jewishly from this way and going backwards. I found myself thinking during the forest fires in Southern California, if the apartment building I live in now burned to the ground, what is it I would have lost? What does the stuff mean now? And that was a part, it wouldn't be as deliberate as I would do it now because I'm not scared now. But there was a real sense as I was moving through the culling and the packing and the sorting and the giving away, what matters? What represents something that I want to take forward and what represents something that I can hold as a memory and release the object that represents the memory. And that was a long process of going through each of the things, each of the objects.
A lot of lists.
Oh, I love lists, a lot of lists. The books were probably the most emotional for me of my objects because they represented so much of my life. But I found good library collections to take them. And I tell myself stories. It works really well for me. And so the story that I told myself is some young scholar will find this collection in these books and it will open the world to them the way it did to me. And therefore I can release it. Mostly that works. Sometimes I'll be in a conversation and I'll go to my shelf to get the book that's the perfect one and it's gone and I'll have a little sink. But mostly it's worked. But I think to go back to the question, it's a confrontation with what matters. That's the task of what this stuff is, what it represents, what matters to you now, what you want around you as you move into the next chapter of things. I think it's important emotional labor, the culling stuff.
Yeah.
Yes.
You said earlier something that sounded like an echo of something that I had known and treasured. And so I searched for it and found it. And it's a poem. I'm going to read part of a poem by Philip Levine. It's called The Last Step. I thought I would find my father, and hand in hand we would pace off a child's life. I thought the air crystal around us would hold his words until they became me, never to be forgotten. I thought the rain was far off under another sky. I thought that to become a man, I had only to wait, and the years, gathering slowly, would take me there. They took me somewhere else.
Thank you.
Mm,
Yes,
Thank you so much. I have a sense that we've come to the end of this conversation.
yeah.
And I want to thank all of you for being here,
And I will see you all right over there as soon as I get my coat put on.
So we should
Thank you.
So I think we should actually ask Sandy to go there rather than
To process?
to process, right?
Okay, I will process.
Thank you for joining us. We'll let you know about future presentations. We're happy that you came. Stay by.